We do that every time we're in our venue.
Yeah, so. I didn't want to shop. One is to go out there. If you have a company, pick the other one. I want to go out by a kid. And then I'll go the big way.
Okay, it is 6 o'clock. We'll call to order the planning commission meeting, Pocketville City, June 8th, 2022. The first thing is the pledge of allegiance by Commissioner Eaton.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, do any commission members have any disclosures or declarations?
I am item number 2, a business item F2. I'm the business owner of the Springs.
Okay. Any other? Okay, we'll take us to the agenda. It's been asked if we can move the agenda around. We'll move item number 8 to number 10, item number 9 to 11, and number 10 will go to 8, and 11 to 9. Anyone want to make a motion for that?
I can do it. I motion that we move business item number 8 to be number 10. Number 9 will now become 11. 10 will be number 8, and 11 will be number 9.
Do we have a motion?
I second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. We'll take a vote.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, before we jump to the next one, I just want to introduce Bruce Jenkins, Conflict Counsel. Oh, and we have our attorney Heath Snow coming in, so everybody knows who is our backs over here today. We'll go to the review of and approval of the planning commission meetings for March 9th, April 13th, and May 11th. We need to table April 13th. Did anybody else have a chance to look at that? On the other two, the March and the May.
Yeah.
No issues on them? Okay, I'll look for a motion on that.
I make a motion that we approve the minutes for March and April.
March and May,
Oh, March and May.
yeah.
We
They
don't
were
have
just-
April's yet. Okay. Okay. March and May.
Okay, we have a motion.
Second the motion.
Okay, motion and a second. We'll take a vote. Yay.
Aye.
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 Okay, this brings us to the public forum. This is for anything that's not on the agenda tonight. You can please address us at the microphone. We're not allowed to give comment back directly at this time, but we will take note on anything, and then please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Okay, not seeing any public forum, we'll move on to the reports. The only report that I have is that the landscaping ordinance is on pause right now. There's probably going to be some more feedback from other districts and other cities, so we're just going to let them do a bunch of work until we really get to the final. So you won't see it back on our agenda for a while. And does any of the other commissioners have anything to report? How about the planning and zoning administrator, Sarah McKeever, do you have anything to report? No? Okay, it takes us to the business item of the meeting. All of the renewals on the conditional use permits are current and there's no complaints on file. Does anybody have any questions on that? Looks like items 1 through 5. I'll look for a motion on that.
I motion for approval, business items F1 through 5.
I second it.
Okay, a motion and a second, we'll vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, it brings us to item number 6, discussion on amended final plat application submitted by George and Anita Lindstrom. This is going to be to amend the final plat on tax ID number T-TEA-B-1/T-TEA-B-116. The current zoning is R120. Did anybody have questions on the amended final plat application? Any questions on that? Does everybody see the process in that? The process on how that was done? So in the final plat, code? Yeah.
My comments are in this report.
Oh, you know what I can do is just read them.
Our screen is down.
Computer's really slow. Okay, the staff recommendations, the staff has reviewed the application to determine that it's complete. The plat map has been reviewed by the JUC members. Ash Creek Sewer District stated that they have pressure sewer laterals to lot 16 that has not been used. There were no other comments from JUC members. The city engineer is reviewing the plat to verify the plat submitted complies with state and local code. The staff would recommend that any motion made be conditional upon staff verifying that all maps are complete record and complete and comply with the code. And so the very end of 10-19C-4, it's just item F is amending the plat. It says any landowner whose land has been platted as provided in this chapter may, upon application of the city, have such plat or portion of thereof, any street or alley therein contained, altered, or amended. The procedure for amending the plat or altering the subdivision plat may be the same procedure for applying for a new subdivision and will determine at the discretion of the planning commission. So it's a pretty wide scope that we could choose, but I don't think we could choose much more than actually just going through the final plat.
So where is this? I mean, where is it? Where is this located, the Tocqueville Estates?
It's in Tokerville Heights.
Can you zoom in? Maybe on that top, zoom that.
Just before you cross the bridge, you turn right and go up the hill. It's right
Oh,
up.
okay, yes, yes. Shangri-La,
If you're going over Shangri-La, this is the subdivision. Shangri-La.
okay.
Does anybody else have any more questions on amending that plat? Would the applicant like to address the commission about the amendment?
I just wanted to get past, that's all.
Super easy? Pretty reasonable, so.
Yeah.
Okay, at this time, we'll open the item for public hearing, and it's to amend the final plat submitted by George and Anita Lindstrom. We'll open the public hearing. Please keep your comments for 3 minutes. Not seeing any comments. I'll look for a motion to close the public hearing.
I motion to close the public hearing.
I second it.
Motion in a second. We'll vote.
Aye.
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 And is there any further discussion on item number 6? I'd look for a recommendation then.
I'll recommend approval with the condition upon staff verifying that all maps are completed, recorded, and comply with code.
A motion in a second. We'll take a vote.
Aye.
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 Good.
You asked.
There you go.
Okay, that'll take us to number 7. Give me 1 second. So I'm gonna have to get there. So the number 7 is discussion on nightly rental application submitted by Mark and Laura Merkling. Everybody might remember they submitted one a few months ago, so the name looks the same. It's not the same property. It's, it's located at 152 North Toka Boulevard, tax ID number T-69-A-2B. Current zoning is R112. The staff comments. Well, that's part of the staff comments. So it's a new application from the Merklings. This is not a continuation of the previous application. The JUC has determined that they are adequate services. The Hurricane Valley Fire District mentioned needing to inspect the home to verify the code compliance. No other JUC members had comments. The application submitted is complete as per the nightly rental permit and code 10-17.3. Please see application that is included in the packet. The applicant will need to comply with Tokerville City's 10-17.3. The applicant will need to obtain a city business license if the Planning Commission and City Council approves this application. Staff has determined this application is complete and that the required documents have been supplied.
North Toker Boulevard. As you noted before, this is our second application. Turns out after going through the first application, we have a subdivision next door. So we won't be using active rental for some time in that house. We own another property here in Tokerville that we're going to come back to the building permit, these conditions on moving into that property, and then doing active rental for this one. Also, we already have the fire inspection, passed the fire inspection for the valley before that documentation to the city. Thank you.
Okay, if the commission doesn't have any comments, we'll open it up for public hearing. Okay, we'll open the public hearing for Mark and Laura Merkling for a nightly rental application located at 152 North Toker Boulevard. Okay, not seeing any public comment for the nightly rental application. Make the motion to close it.
Make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second it?
A motion and a second. Can we vote?
Aye.
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 Okay, I would look for a motion. If everybody doesn't have any other comments.
Make a motion to approve item F7, subject to staff comments.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We'll vote.
Aye.
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 Okay, since we have our change, we'll go to the new one, which is the discussion on the RV.
Kelly?
RV park. Let me find it. So we went through this on the discussion items last time. And I think everybody felt pretty comfortable with what it is. It's a pretty simple addition, but it at least gives us a few things to start moving forward and allows the applicant for the RV park to start having some criteria to fall back on. The applicant was submitted, or the applicant, the approval was based on the approval of this ordinance also, so they know that they have to follow this ordinance. So, do you have any questions on that, or can talk about any more of it?
There are a couple of things that I wanted to bring up on it just as an idea. I see that we have a 30-day time limit. You have to be 30 days, and then you have to check out for 48 hours. That's what it says in the new draft.
Right.
So then I look at the permitted trailers and things on the park model. Park model is something that is a little bit more, I don't know if you've seen park models, but they look like tiny houses with skirts around them and things like that. So I think that if we're looking at a short term, 30 days, that's not something we want to have on that.
I think this is just intended for the RVs only, so the
Right.
park models and the tiny homes that are going to be associated with this probably won't be, so.
But it's only recreational vehicles, trailers, motorhomes, park models. They are trailers that have skirts around them. They're not something you would move in and have them.
Right. Correct.
So I didn't know what they were. I actually talked to Wayne about it. He's, you know what a park model is? I I looked it up, and it's definitely something you might find in a residential park.
Right.
So you don't want that. So that has nothing, that really doesn't have anything to do with so this is permitted uses, right?
Yeah.
So do you saying you want to
I would say
strike
strike
park
park
model?
models.
Okay, so not to anything to do with the time thing, so two separate items we're
Oh,
talking
I'm
about.
sorry.
So park models,
Yeah.
you want to strike
I would
that?
strike that one, and I say because it fits you wouldn't put one of those on there for 30 days. That's why. Resorts here are for snowbirds, and they come down for the winter and that kind of thing. 30 days seems a little limiting to me.
We went through this in
I-
great depth, and you
I
were
know I wasn't
absent
here,
on
and
the
that's why I didn't want to
discussion.
bring it up.
Yeah.
I don't know where.
Well, I think these are two separate things, completely separate things myself, but the park models and park trailers, RV parks, I think that's just in the permitted area, right? So I think I think we should look at it in two ways. The park models can also be considered tiny cabins almost, So, and that's what the applicant has already put in for. So, and then the second thing would be the time limit. The time limit is not going to it's not going to affect the permanent or the structures or the so-called permanent structures, park models and or tiny cabins, yeah. Because in this also, it gives a percentage of number of spaces that they can use.
Right, 15%.
15% of that can only be.
So my understanding was that the tiny homes were going to be a permanent thing, not a trailer that they were renting out.
Right.
And so that 15% would be excluded from the occupancy time limit. So, you want to strike park models from permitted uses because it might be conflicting with or we could even just call out.
Well, and I wanted to discuss it and see what we thought. No, park models to me and now are we talking about allowing them to use the park models as night rentals as part of their 15%?
I think so.
That's the way I understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that the intent?
Because they haven't really determined if they're going to build on
Okay,
site.
but so somebody coming in from wherever parking a park model on there for a month is not.
No, that's not, that would not be.
Okay, then that makes no sense.
And I think that we decided that we wanted 30 days because of the lake being there close by. So we want everyone to be able to enjoy it, not somebody to come in and stay for 2 months, 3 months, whatever. So that's why we put the 30 days.
The ordinance, though, could be anywhere in town. We can't put it specific to the lake being there or giving them amenities based on the lake, because that one does have that, but there's a lot of different things. So just saying. I think your alternate would like to comment while you guys are talking about this.
Yeah, I went to RV park on the I-15 corridor from St. George to here and everything through Hurricane. And went through here, if you want to hear it, what the recommendations and what should happen to make a decent RV park. And kind of what I've came up with is in here you're depicting access roads of 25 feet and one ways of 12 feet width. That doesn't seem to be, the norm is wider, bigger and wider. I would recommend 28 feet wide and 14 feet wide on the one-way streets, because most of the complaints of all these RV park owners, they made a mistake and made their roads too narrow and the curves too sharp. And most of the people are 70 and older, and they don't drive that well. So that recommendation came from every one of the RV parks. And then down the line, where your maximum density is, or your space, 25 feet would be the bare minimum width of a space, preferably 30 on. I've got all these notes, and I'm not going to go through it because it'll take forever. But everyone that did it and the ones that didn't do wish they would have had it bigger and wider. because you need that room. Because you got an RV now with 4 slides on both sides, and your RV is 8 feet wide. You got 2.5 on each side. So you add 5, that's 13. You add a 6-foot car, which you need 7 foot. You've already burned up 20 feet. There's no room. So I would recommend that you go a little wider on your spaces, not 20 feet. You at least go 25 to 30. And that was the comment of everybody. We went a little bit wider. Some of them are plenty wide and they like it. I went through each one and seen the RV set up and how they worked and the complaints that they had plus what the owners had.
Did you go back to the RV parks like twice? Because you went to them last time.
I went through them all. I wasn't able to stay at each one though. Yeah. And then also dogs was the main issue. Without a place for dogs, then it becomes a sanitation issue. For your fence, it goes all the way around. Most of the cities are requiring that 6'4" fence, solid fence all the way around, unless you're adjacent to another RV park.
The commercial design standards also call out the fencing. Let's
Yeah.
check that too.
And your stay, I think we thought that maybe they should be able to stay longer. I'd like to stay longer. But as far as the city is concerned, is if you stay any more after 28 days, we cannot collect transient tax. Only the first month. After that, you can't collect any transient tax from them, nightly rentals or anything. So maybe, I think Sean mentioned that we should be under 30 days. But we need to be under 28 days max stay if the city so desires to collect that tax. And most of the parks do not allow it, especially in southern Utah, because there's so many visitation that they want that flow to come in and out. They make more money for them by shortening the stay. And we make more money if they don't stay so long. That's the way that the Utah reads. And a couple comments from them, just so you'll know. The guests don't like gravel. There's 2 of them in St. George that's total gravel, and they're not doing as well as the other ones with hardscape, like it's in our plan, concrete or asphalt, preferably concrete on the where the bus parks, because it's not as hot as asphalt. And room. I wish I'd have built more room. None of them have 10 sites. None of them have tiny homes. They don't want to deal with the housekeeping of that problem. I know out here they want those, but that's not our choice or the city's. Those are just some of the things on here that could be changed if you wanted to.
The 25 and the 12 off the previous applicant, and I don't think we can have the applicant change that at this time. So we definitely have to allow them whatever they have in their construction drawings for the width.
I think these are wider, weren't they, on theirs? I think theirs are 30. They're 30, and that's 30 is really nice because you have a little park space. And one more thing, parking. That's right, parking was the biggest issue. They need spare parking besides just the parking in the RV, because they said everybody that's long-termers brings 2 vehicles with them. So there's not quite enough parking, so that's just something to think about. I think enough said for that. If you want the documentation, I've got it all, and I've got maps of everybody's RV park, how they lay out, the sizes. But I think what they had planned was sufficient space. He recommended, a lot of them recommend 10 spots per acre. Most of them are 10 spots per acre instead of 16, but 16 still fits in that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do we have any more discussion before we open for public hearing? Let's come back to discussion too.
Yeah, let's come back to it.
Yeah. Okay, so at this time, we'll open the public hearing, and the public hearing sought for ordinance 2022.XX RV Park Ordinance, Title 10, Chapter 29, Section 1 of the Tokerville City Code. If anybody would like to have public comment, please come to the microphone, state your name, address, please limit it to 3 minutes. Okay.
Now's the
we will,
chance.
We'll go ahead and look for a motion to close.
Motion to close public hearing. I'll second the motion.
We have a motion in a second. We'll vote.
Aye. Aye.
Okay, any other discussion items? Do we want to make any small changes before we send it to?
I think that's worthy to make some of those changes.
Yeah, I do too.
that- Where he did all the homework and talked to actual people. I think that's probably the best recommendations we could have.
So let's just go with the start real quick and make these minor changes. We'll jump 25 to 30. Is that everybody wants to do?
Well, I don't know, it's the city's job to design their park either. These are just minimums. They can make
Yeah.
the spaces as wide as they want.
Right.
I mean, I think just leave it the way it is and let them design how they want to design it. And if they don't design it right, people aren't going to stay there. And if they do it right,
Or do 25 or instead of 20.
It is 25.
Is it
25. We're talking about the width of roads.
Yeah.
right?
Oh, you're talking
I mean, these are
about
just minimums.
And then the 20 would be the separation. But I kind of agree with that. It's that if they want to make it smaller and more congested, it's going to be their problem. But at the same time, we can make it easier on some things.
But then it's more expensive, the wider roads and everything else that we're doing. And maybe that's going to prohibit.
Yeah.
So,
And we've had this time discussion, the occupancy time limit, like. a whole
I don't know
bunch
how
of
many times, yeah.
Yeah, and we might have to make an amendment or change it later. I don't know. Got any feedback on that?
I do like the limitation of 28 days because he is correct on the transit room tax. Beyond
For
that,
the 30 days is what we
we want to be able to capture that, and I wouldn't want to put a limitation that would allow them to be doing 30-day rentals and have them not collect as a way of. Because if you think about it, if you could subtract transit room tax, you could probably stay a couple extra days for. So I would suggest that it be 28 days.
So you would suggest to move it to 28 instead of 30?
I would.
That's an easy one.
Yeah.
Okay, any other discussion?
I think we ought to go to 25 wide on the spaces instead of 20.
Okay, so on the, hold on, let me get that, on G, making 20, the space is 25 feet?
Yeah.
Okay,
And I like the reasoning, parking in two vehicles, so.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
sounds like someone's ready to make a motion, but I'm not sure who.
Now,
Okay, here we go. I make a motion that we make a couple of changes to the RV park, what's it called? Ordinance. So we're going to change on G, we're going to change it to a minimum width of 25 feet instead of 20 feet. And then, what's the last one?
P.
P, we're going to change that to 28 days maximum occupancy instead of 30 days.
Okay, we have a motion,
I'll second.
motion in a second, we'll take a vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Okay. That'll take us to number 9, and Jared Bates, I think, is going to lead us on this path and give us a great definition on this. So if you want to give us the whole breakdown and the hows, whys, and do's and don'ts, then you have our full undivided attention.
So this is Jared Bates. So this is Jared Bates, and he is our certified floodplain manager. And so if you remember, so when I got here, we had a couple of FEMA violations. We weren't quite sure where exactly the floodplain was, where the floodway was, and we had no road in hazard zone. And so Jared is an engineer, and he's also a city certified floodplain manager. So he's helped us through our FEMA violations and done an incredible job. So we put a moratorium on building in the floodplain until we have an updated floodplain ordinance. As we were going through just making it floodplain, it became really clear that we actually needed something more substantial to deal with the floodway too. So the ordinance is now, so it's Title 11, changed to just be flood control. That was at the recommendation of the engineer, so, Jared and Rick. So, we think that we've got an ordinance in front of us. In addition to that, that works really well, we can understand it well. And then, we've also established, we'll put a map of it, but we've established that the erosion hazard zone now. And then what we're doing is working with Jared also for, it's called a growth grant, which is building resilient infrastructure. We're working on that so that we can start, and then we're also working with Jared. This isn't obviously a big document and things that this is all the flood control. And we're also working with 5 county associations of government on our natural hazard mitigation plan to address things like, it addresses everything from volcanoes, earthquakes, wind, all of those things, floods, it addresses fire, working on different projects like cleaning out willows and ash trees to reduce fire. So we're working on a lot of different things with Rosenberg Associates. But in order to lift the moratorium on building in the floodplain, FEMA, when they came in and we had our FEMA violations for building in the floodplain, we did not have a floodplain development permit program or a way to issue a floodplain development. So Jared has helped us create that. He's done a ton of work. But he's done a ton of work behind the scenes. So for now, what we've done is when FEMA came in, they said, look, here are your options. What you can do is you can stop building, and what you're going to do is you're going to stop building in the floodplain so you update your ordinance. And so you'll stop building in there. You'll get a certified floodplain manager, which we did with Jared, and then update this ordinance. So those are the 3 things we had to do. So this is the final stage. We've done all the other. We've cleaned up all of our violations. We've addressed the natural hazards. We're working on the brick grant. And so now Jared's here, because obviously this is in front of you. And we're looking for, obviously, if you have any questions, you could ask Jared. You can kind of walk you through that, but feel comfortable. What we're actually looking for, we'd ask it, I mean, feel comfortable with it, that you'll go to the council. So we adopt it, we could start issuing building permits again in the floodplain. We have some that have stacked up, and so that's kind of where we are. So Jared, I don't know if you want to kind of give them a brief overview, or if you just want to ask questions.
You have questions, or maybe just a general idea or grant questions as to what's changed, what's different, that kind of thing.
Yeah, if you have questions about what it's going to look like to report now.
Where is the floodplain? Number 1.
We'll get a map.
Yeah, so you can pull it up on the recorder's site. And so kind of what happens now, when someone comes in and they say, hey, I have some property and I would like to start building. The first thing that we do is we pull up the floodplain map, and if that person needs a building permit, we send them immediately to Jared. No one can get a building permit anywhere in the floodplain without going through a certified floodplain manager. So that's how we stop having floodplain violations. And it's working really well.
Oh, that makes sense.
And then, so what we use is the county map, and there's a layer that you can click off to the side that will say, floodplain. And it'll say floodplain on there.
Yeah, so just to clarify your question, so this ordinance doesn't actually establish a floodplain. Floodplains are really here since we went to NFIP, it's probably 30 years ago. And kind of some of the major changes that are in here with respect to the floodplain, basically we've added a restriction that all residential construction needs to be built at least 2 feet above 100 floodplain elevation. So if you go through here and look at the floodplain maps, there are base flood elevations associated with that floodplain. So that's one thing that's been added. Before it was at or above, it was raised to, that's kind of standard for most of the communities here locally. And anything that's commercial is 1 foot above 100 floodplain. And so this is the ordinance that kind of defines what can happen in that area. So,
What's the difference between the two? 1 foot and 2 foot?
generally, the idea is that there's more risk associated with the residential development. Meaning, if you want to make a commercial here, that'd be okay. All science finds that commercial development is floodplain is less risky, less inclined to have stricter rules. But if you want to make it too, okay. No, you can look at it.
2 for both. 2 for
Yeah, that would be-
residential, 2 for-
That would be fun.
That was just a question, yeah.
I've got another just curiosity. The erosion hazard zone, is any of that considered to be in the floodway? And do we ever do we build anything in the floodway ever?
Sure, so
Do
yeah,
you want to report them out?
yeah.
That might be
Next
helpful.
question, the erosion hazard zone is generally much wider than the floodplain and floodway.
Right.
So just definition wise, floodway is the narrowest, portion of the floodplain that's most restricted. So there's basically, as far as construction of the floodway, there can't be any sort of buildings, there can't be, there shouldn't be any development. I guess what the rules are, is if there's any construction or, disturbance in the floodway, you can make the floodplain elevation rise, more than 0 feet. So basically, there shouldn't be any platted lots and there's things like that. That becomes complicated. And then again, the road hazard is a much wider area. It's different rules apply there. But there is a floodway here that's.
Excuse me.
Say that last word again.
So, basically, all the floodways are
Yeah.
located within the road.
Within the road.
Road hazard zone is like this, floodplain, floodway.
So Sean, on that drawing up there, everything inside of the pink
Mm-hmm.
is the erosion hazard zone. You got a different color. You have a light blue and a dark blue.
Light blue is the floodway, so it's narrow or at the floodplain, and the dark blue is the floodplain.
Yes.
So, we need to develop all of them in the floodplain between the light blue and the dark blue line. And that's what she meant for the floodplain. That allows you to build there with certain conditions. And part of that is if there's something else permit, I would review and make sure that it meets standards.
So one thing with that, so anything that has, so even though, so as a floodplain, or as a certified floodplain manager, he is not just reviewing, building in the floodplain as far as residential or anything else. He's also doing, like if we have anything that's gonna be with the Army Corps of Engineers, if we have anything that's gonna be with, so FEMA, Army Corps of Engineers, state alteration permits, or floodplain development permits with FEMA, he covers all of our waterways run through here. So, like, for example, on the Westfield Bridge, if we end up doing something like that, Jared would be the one who would go through with the city to say, what can we do? We've already been working with him on that. So he addresses a lot of things, not just the residential, like making sure somebody's not building too close to the
Where are them sections cut out on the map? Is that just a little error?
Oh, the white,
Yeah.
that's the city boundary.
City boundaries.
That's on the-
If it's not in our boundary, we don't care.
Well, it's our jurisdiction.
I know.
I'm just kidding.
So,
No. So the floodway is the purple, right?
The light blue.
Light blue, okay.
Deepest part of it.
And then as far, because we have a preliminary plat that looks like that's down, no, that's not down near the cemetery, is it? Never mind, disregard that.
For the north.
Yeah, disregard that. Okay, that was it for the south part, makes more sense.
And just because there's a lot in here about the road and that, but just to clarify, but it's not a restriction to no build, it just means that if you build there, there's a rules that apply.
kind of like the hillside.
Yes, exactly, that's a good.
You're the one that reviews all that to make sure that all the problems.
And if it requires them to build something with some sort of structure to maintain or mitigate erosion, then they have to sign an agreement saying that they will perpetually maintain that and that they will indemnify them, the city, of holding harmless. So that's another provision that's been added into this ordinance, which I think is a good thing too, because they want to build there and they want to build something up, add some sort of specialty, whatever it's going to be that Jared signs off on, they're going to need to maintain it to do it.
And that's standard knowledge.
Yeah.
That way.
Does anybody else have any other questions on it?
I'm only allowed to speak when we get to the fire.
Thanks for asking, Jared.
You speak at the public hearing.
This next year.
Thank you. Okay, at this time, I would like to open the public hearing for ordinance 2022.XX floodplain ordinance Title 11, Chapter XX for the Tuckerville City Code. Is any
Sandy Crowe, 1875 North Hills Boulevard. I just have a question. Is there a difference between the 100-year flood zone and the 50-year flood zone, and it's identified in the ordinances and on the county map? There it is.
That's a great.
We can, we'll close the public hearing and then answer it properly, right? Yeah, whatever, when we're ready for it. Is any other public comment? Okay, I'll take a motion to close it.
Make a motion to close public hearing.
Second the motion.
Motion in a second, we'll vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Mr. Bates, would you like to answer that question?
Can you repeat your question one more time?
Is it identified in the ordinance that it is between the 100-year flood zone and the flood zone? There's that little bit of buffer there.
So what it is the ordinance identifies the 100 flood plain or the 1% and then the floodway. Those are the two that are specified in the road as of that.
Is that identified on the county map?
Yeah, it's,
So
yeah,
the 100 years.
yeah, it's right on the kind of site.
Sorry, there's TV.
No, you're good. I mean,
So we're
the
looking at
data.
one.
We needed more money for all the attorneys here today, so we had to take something off.
That's right. My money.
We're lucky to get that.
I feel so loved.
Jared, when was the last time FEMA came?
2009, they did,
I know they did comprehensively in 2009. I didn't know if they'd done anything since then.
oh, yeah, so, often there's what's called a letter of map division, and for things like myself, it's kind of change stuff in that. So what happens sometimes, it takes, like it's a little revision, sometimes it takes maybe 6 months for it to show up on here. And this is just the county taking information from FEMA. Sometimes there might be a lag or something. But there's no question about the.
They did a pretty comprehensive remapping after all that flooding
Yeah.
in 08, 09. So they went through the entire county. And then you always have developers and landowners retaining engineers like Jared to come in if they want to get a letter of map amendment to amend that floodplain because they're going to do something to it, either build it up or something like that. And so that base mapping gets adjusted on a regular basis. That's what he's talking about. Sometimes there's a lag between when the county GIS department gets all this information that shows up on these online maps.
So like, say if you're doing the development, you would need to supplement there, and I would verify whether it's on the map, you would go through that process. Did you have a question on this place, or?
No, just specifically, so the ordinance for the 100 years would be different than the ordinance for 50 years or more people.
We don't use,
No, there's just this distinction with 100 floodplain and everything inside of that. And then the other area of floodway was narrow. That one was very restricted. And so in the floodway and the 100 floodplain, there's no distinction.
yeah, so we don't use a 50-year floodplain designation. We follow the FEMA's maps on the 100-year floodplain, but we also designate the floodway inside of that. And then in the pink, we've designated on that other map, this erosion control zone.
Does anybody else have any other comments on the floodplain ordinance? If not, I would look for.
I recommend our motion to approve or move this to the city council. Recommend approval for the ordinance 2022.XX floodplain ordinance.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We'll take a vote.
Aye.
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 Okay, that moves us to item number 10.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jared. Thanks, Jared. Item number 10, I thought there'd be a lot more public people here, a lot more people to talk about this one. Item number 10, discussion on preliminary plat application submitted by Sun River Firelight. Senator Firelight has submitted phases 1 and 2, tax ID number T-128-PV1/T-141PV1. The current zoning is R120 with the development agreement.
I've got one. I've got this one.
Yep, I got one.
I've got it, I printed mine.
The planning, or the staff comments, the staff has reviewed the application and determined it to be complete. The plat map has been reviewed by the JUC members with the following comments. Ash Creek Sewer District has stated that there will need to be private sewer agreements. Hurricane Valley Fire District stated that they need to know street addresses for the new sites. And Rocky Mountain Power stated that they need to have contracts signed between the developer and them. No other JUC comments were made at that time. Staff would recommend that any motion be conditional upon the development agreement being finalized. So as far as the preliminary plat goes, we have to follow two things. And if the council wants, if I say anything wrong, before you guys jump in here on this. So there's two things we have to go through: the preliminary plat application, the subdivision design and standards, and then also we have to refer back to the conceptual MPDO approval, and we can refer back to the development agreement because the road standards are smaller than our city calls for. So did everybody have a chance to look at all that stuff and have any questions on it?
That gives you an idea where it is in the city, is that red?
Red line, Joe?
Yeah, if you want to talk about.
This is the red.
So this is also part of the next process, even though it's a secondary, it's two separate items. Here, you want to see that? Red portion?
It's within that red.
So the biggest difference is the street sections. I can't remember what the full dimensions were, but they're definitely smaller than our 50-foot cross sections. And
They are 20.
the lot sizes are a little bit smaller.
On the private right of ways, they show 26 feet. 30 foot.
So this is not, so that's why this is like a three-part thing. And when we get to the next one, it'll even be more, but we have to go back to the conceptual MPDO approval. And it is on page, wrong document. It's on page, I don't even have page numbers on it. But in their minimum standards for development and their design standards in the conceptual MPDO that was approved, they have, here's their minimum setbacks for their lot. 10 foot, side is 5 foot, rear is 3 and 10. Setbacks for public arterial roads, 10 foot and 6 foot wall separating the road from landscaping. But when we go back to this, and this is also backed up in the development agreement, and I think it starts on page 25, if I remember right. Yeah. So basically, the draft development agreement goes through and confirms this cross sections are smaller. And then also, if we go to the very back of the MPDO, it pulls in and actually gives the design for which streets have been already approved in the conceptual.
Exhibit I to the development agreement's got the road cross sections.
Yeah, that's what I just. Development agreement's in there too?
Say it again?
Development agreement also? Cross sections, okay.
Yeah, it's it references exhibit I in the body of the development agreement. And this exhibit I has the actual, in the development agreement, exhibit I has the actual widths of pavement, curb gutter, sidewalk.
Does anybody have any questions on that? Preliminary plat?
So in our preliminary MPDO, we said 30 feet was our minimum. And we changed it.
No, their MPDO, and then the development agreement for, there's actually a 26-foot cross section.
Right, that's what they're saying for the,
Yep, so there's a 36, a 30, 50. Where is the 26? I know I saw it.
that was in this one. Yeah,
Actually, not in the development agreement though.
and that's what I don't see. in the development
Smallest
agreement.
is 30-foot right of way in the active
Right,
adult.
we have- Preliminary has a 26, is this?
In the conceptual.
Asphalt. 30, our 30, the 30-foot right of way that was approved in the conceptual does show 26 feet of asphalt with curb gutter, or curb, back of curb, I guess.
It's all how you define the right of way. It's the same stuff as that. Just for the.
Not on this exact topic, so I'm thinking about it. So this is what we're doing. It says the minutes were stated.
Yeah, that needs to be that first page. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, does anybody have any more questions on the preliminary plat? Okay, at this time, we'll open the preliminary plat application submitted by Sun River Firelight up for public hearing. Anyone want to address the commission? Okay, for motion to close it.
I motion to close public hearing. Second.
Motion and a second, we'll take a vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, if we don't have any other further questions on the preliminary plan, I'd take a motion. Look for a motion.
I motion for approval on the preliminary.
With staff comments.
With staff comments. I'll second.
Okay, take a vote.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
That was easy. Okay, now we're gonna go to number 11, discussion on preliminary master plan development overlay submitted by Sun River. So the MPDO process, what I did here is printed out the preliminary approval process. If we want, because this is a way bigger undertaking, then we can go through this line by line and we can get the lawyer's feedback. If everybody's done all their homework on the MPDO, the preliminary approval. One of the requirements here was to have the preliminary plat approval. And that's what starts the first phase of the preliminary approval. So these are two things, one in one. Without, they work in hand, and this is what brings the MPDO to life. Having the preliminary plan approval and then the preliminary MPDO approval. So if you guys want to go through it line by line on the code to make sure that we meet the requirements, or if everybody's gone through the development agreement and the conceptual MPDO enough that we could just ask questions.
What I might give just a little bit of clarification and look to Bruce to confirm this as conflict counsel. Our MPDO ordinance is a very interesting ordinance. It's basically a 3-step approval process. What Firelight has received to date is the conceptual approval for its MPDO plan, which I think originally was, how many pages long was that? And we've submitted an augmented version with a bunch of fancy pictures and like done professionally, but that's more for marketing. And that was what has received Planning Commission's recommendation and the City Council's approval. With that, in there was specifically a series of maps and some tables and some specific breakdowns. Most of those maps have now been included as exhibits to the development agreement. In order to get preliminary MPDO approval, which is the second step in the process, it says that you have to submit a plat for an initial phase of the development. And that's what the developer's just done. They've submitted a plat for phases 1 and 2 of their active adult community called Firelight, Sun River Firelight Sun River or something, which you just voted to approve. It also indicated that there needed to be some additional information along with the submittal to the city. There's also been a narrative where there was each of the different items in 10.15.8 have been addressed. It says a couple of the important ones are, it says that a draft of the development agreement needs to be submitted. 9, excuse me. 8 is the conceptual, 9 is the preliminary approval, and 10 is the final approval. So in order for you guys to give or recommend preliminary approval to the city council, you need to basically be the gatekeepers and check to make sure that they've submitted the required information, one of which has to be a draft of the development agreement. It is not, tonight is not your job to necessarily, you've got 2 attorneys here who have gone through this pretty closely, and we can answer any questions you have about the development agreement, but it's not to recommend approval of the development agreement. It just simply says that that has to be, a draft of it has to be submitted. I will tell you, it's pretty far along in the process. It's been gone through drafting, review, revision, second review with some detailed comments from conflict counsel. Another thing that has to be submitted is that we have to submit a set of proposed governing documents for any owners association that would maintain common area or private, private common area. We've provided to the city's conflict counsel a copy of essentially it's the community charter for Firelight, which is the master CC&Rs for the entire area, as well as we've submitted a draft of a subset of CC&Rs for the active adult community. So there's going to be some specific regulations with regards to active adult. Those have both been submitted to council. And so I think at this point, what we're asking for is that the planning commission would recommend to the council preliminary approval, finding that the items in 10.15.9 have been submitted. Again, recognizing that what has to be submitted is just drafts. There is going to be, prior to you guys recommending the final MPDO approval, we're going to have a signed version of the development agreement. It's going to need to be ready to be recorded, and we're going to have final version of CC&Rs that are going to need to be recorded, along with the final plat for this phases 1 and 2. Once those things have all been done, and we can't get final plat approval cannot, or a final plat for a subdivision cannot be recorded until all the public improvements have either been built out there or they've been bonded for. It is the developer's intent to build the public improvements. So there's probably, Scott, if you were to build the public improvements starting tomorrow, how long would it take you to do phases 1 and 2?
6 to 8 month process.
Okay, so between now and 6 to 8 months from now, we've got to have a final development agreement hammered out. We've got the city's conflict council has got to review our CC&Rs and make sure that there is a mechanism in place to maintain common areas. And just so the planning commission knows, conflict council is not necessarily looking, they don't get involved in private CC&Rs other than when I review them for the city for other developments, I'm looking just to make sure that there's nothing in those CC&Rs that are contrary to our city's standards. For instance, we couldn't put in the master CC&Rs that you could build residences higher than up to 45 feet when we only have a 35-foot height limitation. So if I saw that, I would be scratching that out, telling the developer to go back and make that change so that it complies. And that's what Bruce will be doing with the master CC&Rs and the supplemental or the sub CC&Rs for the active adult community. So this step right here is to get preliminary approval. When 6 to 8 months from now, when that plat is ready to record, you will need to see that the development agreement is ready. the CCNRs are ready, because it's going to be recorded plat, CCNRs, development agreement. Unless Bruce sees another order.
I agree with that order, but I do have some questions later.
Okay. Okay.
So when you're done, I just want
Yeah, and the idea is at that point in time that those three things happening would be culminated by one other thing, is that the city will adopt an ordinance amending its zoning map to designate all the property that Firelight owns or may acquire in the future and make it subject to the development agreement, to have all those areas designated on our official zoning map as being MPDO. That's how you apply that
We already
MPDO.
have the overlay, it's already done though, right? On the conceptual, the overlay is done on the whole property?
The conceptual did apply to all the property, but what we're doing is we're only going to finalize the MPDO overlay zoning
For these,
as to what
okay.
the developer owns. As you know, this is 1,700 acres and the developer is purchasing this in segments over time as it develops. And so it could be a 10-year takedown before all 1,700 acres is taken down. Probably longer than that for a build out.
As each piece gets purchased, it will
Yes.
automatically reduce from.
Yeah. Yep. There's going to be a document that's going to be signed on behalf of the city by the developer and by the former developer that had a development agreement, which makes that old development agreement go away, make the newly purchased property subject to this development agreement, and away it becomes part of this MPDO zone. Bruce, you got any clarifications?
Yeah, as to the final plat approval for the first two phases and the final approval for the NPDO.
Conceptual or preliminary approval?
Are you talking final or?
I'm talking about final. Yeah, I'm trying to clarify some of the what
Yeah.
you're saying. Are you saying that Firelight does not want the council in its next meeting or maybe the following one to vote on final NPDO approval? We're waiting 6 to 8 months for that?
They have to submit the final plans, final plat. So if you need the final
Yeah,
plat.
the final plat, you're expecting that submittal, I'm just thinking.
Final plat will be ready to record when construction.
So
That, but when you, but
Bruce,
your process here in this town, you get the final plat approved before you go out there and build those approvals.
well, yeah, Bruce, let me give you an explanation. Once this body recommends approval of the preliminary plat and the city council approves it, then the developer approves the preliminary plat for phases 1 and 2. Then the developer knows exactly where the roads are located, what the sizes of the lots, and then they go and have their engineer prepare a comprehensive set of construction drawings, which then Darren will circulate to all of the utility providers, get them all to sign off. And then they'll start building once they have a fully approved set of construction drawings. At the same time as they're building, they will bring back to the city basically which will look a lot like the preliminary plat, but it'll just be called the final plat. And it will come through the same process, public hearing at the planning commission, public hearing at the city council for approval. It could be approved either the construction drawings have to be approved first, but if it got approved 2 months from now, but the improvements aren't built until 6 months from now, it's going to have to sit on a shelf and can't be recorded until city staff has gone out and inspected all those improvements, made sure that the road is the proper asphalt thickness and that everything was installed per our plans and the city's plans and specifications.
Yes. So I track all of that, I get all of
Okay.
that, and I agree with all that. I guess what I'm saying, I think you're indicating that there will be another public hearing before this commission on the final plat and the final NPDO, because this commission will need to make a recommendation on the development agreement.
With one distinction. Subdivisions require a public hearing at planning commission and council level on both preliminary and final. Zone changes only require a public hearing before this planning commission, but not before the city council.
Right.
So the MPDO overlay zoning which is the thing that comes after the final plat, doesn't, so you're only gonna have one more public hearing, but it's only gonna be on the plat. It's not gonna be on the zoning. You will recommend approval of the MPDO zone, but you won't have to have a public hearing. Sorry, it's a little nuanced, but
I
it is.
know that nuance. This is the issue, you and I haven't talked about this before, so I don't want to make it hard to talk about it now, but I understand that the preliminary approval, all that has to be submitted is a draft of the development agreement. It was, but the preface to that says, it says before this, following the public hearing, the planning commission will recommend to the city approval of modifications or denial of the adoption of the master plan development overlay district, which would seem to me that they would have to make a recommendation on the proposed development agreement at a public hearing stage. So what I'm saying,
So that we can incorporate the district into the development agreement? Is that what you're saying?
yeah, because if today is the only day of a public hearing, well, I guess said differently, I think that the planning commission needs to make a recommendation on the development agreement. And that should occur at a public hearing, not just a public meeting.
And I would say that I don't think the developer has any objection with having a public hearing on both the final plat and the final MPDO approval, which would include some input about the development agreement.
Yeah, that's all. I understand that we don't have a final development agreement. I couldn't even have the planning commission recommend. And yet we've got to change that.
I think what the planning commission needs to hear from you is that you've reviewed the development agreement and that it's in process, actually fairly far along in the process. And it's not just a stack of paper, so blank sheets in between.
Let me say one thing, Joey, and then I think I'll take questions. I think I can clarify this. My only feel is when you, before you go to final plat and you go to final MPDO approval, you need to have, in my view, another public hearing. So we can make recommendations on the development.
That's my question. So we should have, once the development agreement is completed between,
Bruce, we'll have to talk about that.
Well, that'll be my position. Once we've gotten to this final form of agreement where I can say, I'm comfortable, the planning commission is comfortable. There's some things in my comments to the development agreement that I'm looking for planning commission. And then tell them, I've heard from the planning commission on those things.
I see. You're talking like standards, like reduced setbacks or reduced road widths.
Those things the planning commission needs to talk to me about, and we have to come to an understanding that's okay. And then they can make a recommendation.
them standards already been basically completed with the conceptual MPDO? You know, because in that conceptual, it does all pretty much all that now, all those things are.
It does, it may. I'm not saying that the standards in development agreement aren't appropriate, I just, that the document is valid, if you will, so not part of all those processes. I want to make sure the planning commission look at those and say, yes, we approve those are acceptable as we talk about these or not. And just at the end of the day, I think that, that at a public hearing process, 10-15C9, if not done at this public hearing, at a public hearing, this commission will need to make a recommendation to the council of whether to accept the development agreement, accept its modifications, or reject the development agreement. And I just think that needs to be done.
We'll have to do that prior to submittal on the final.
And if the planning commission has any specific questions tonight, I know that Scott has offered and suggested to the planning commission and to the council that if you have any question about the reasonableness of some of these modified standards, that maybe it might be appropriate to have a field trip down to Sun River, because this is going, at least the active adult community is going to look all but identical. You can walk through the different streets and phases and see these are houses with this setback, side setbacks, and these front setbacks. These are what a 30-foot roadway would look like. This is how we deal with, and because all that Scott has done is taken the exact same standards that it's refined over 20 years at Sun River, working with City of St. George. And it's what works and sells well to people 55 and older, I guess. Yeah.
So one thing, coming back to the process here, is there are a number of items that Attorney Snow could probably tell us. So from G, H, all the way through to the end of that is, I think, is L. They're asking for basically exemptions and including them into the final plat. So if anybody was looking through there, them items are not located in the preliminary approval. They're asked to defer to the final.
Yeah, I would say the word exemption might be.
Not exempt, yeah, sorry.
You're right.
Deferred.
Yes, that those things will be still required, but they are things more customarily seen in the final plat. And so the deferral at the preliminary stage was that the developer will still do all those things, but they'll do those things at the final plat stage, defer those.
One of the reasons I bring that up is because I think that we need to make an amendment in the MPDO to remove them to the final stage of that. And so when it comes again, that we don't have to, well, we don't have
To
to
give you a
address
little
it
bit of
that
background on this ordinance, I've been the city attorney for 13 and a half years. Prior to me was Bill Rano, was the attorney. I cannot take any credit, and nor do I necessarily want to take any credit for this MPDO ordinance, but it is requiring a level of specificity at the preliminary stage that before a developer would even know exactly where its lots can be located and its roads can be located to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in engineering and surveying work to provide this additional stuff. Once a preliminary plat, the concept, a preliminary plat has been approved, then the developer knows that it's basically got vested rights to have this many lots, and this is where the roads are going to be located, and this is what it's all going to look like. And then it will go and get into the nuts and bolts, the details of what we would consider to be construction drawings for a subdivision. And a lot of what it's asking to be submitted right now before preliminary plat approval and preliminary MPDO approval is that level of detail that, like Bruce is saying, probably should, or Joey is just probably should be pushed back. And I just don't know if Mr. Rano thought that one through. I do know he's a very detailed person, and
it's to me, that's more like a commercial design standard instead of an MPDO thing, but definitely should be put into the final.
so what we have asked in our application for the preliminary MPDO approval is that those requirements G through L be deferred to the final stage, and we're happy to provide them. But that's.
I haven't had objection to that. It's the conflict council review, and I've not had objection to that for a And I hope I don't complicate things by saying this, but this is how I've, in a very nuts and bolts way, sort of boiled this down, is typically for a zone change, there's not a planning process that goes along with the zone change. It seemed to me that what Bill Ron was doing was making certain that the developer became pregnant at the same time they asked for the zone change. What do I mean by that? You're not only going to get a zone change with this MPDO, you're going to come in with your first phase of a final plat. As opposed to getting the zone change and then getting pregnant second, you're going to get pregnant at the same time. You're going to actually do this development. You're not just going to get a zone change and sit around and wait to see whether you can do it or not. You're going to come in with the final plat. So this preliminary stage, the first sentence says that for the application at preliminary approval stage, following approval of the conceptual plan designed by City Council, the applicant shall make application to the Planning Commission for a master plan preliminary for A. I didn't say an A, because I need one. A master plan preliminary site plan, which is the precursor / preliminary plat approval. And then at the final stage, you have to have final approval of a plat. So it's as though this preliminary stage is the preliminary preliminary plat approval stage of getting ready to be pregnant with the final plat. And so there's just a few of those items, G through L, that are,
You know, if it was a preliminary site plan, G through L would be applicable.
be more
So we maybe just need to call that out in that first thing.
right.
And-
It clarifies the difference between a commercial site plan and the preliminary plat.
Yeah, I think the concept is, and I know that we've required something similar to this in previous development agreements and prior, is that if the city is going to grant a property owner or developer kind of large scale vested rights in a concept or a plan, they want to know that it's going to at least take off, that big airplane that they've just approved is going to get off the ground. And so they require that first phase, the initial phase of the development, to go through and get platted. And then they know that that's at least getting wheels up and trying to take off. And then once it's in the air, then yes, okay, that those entitlements can and are spanned across the entire area. But in order to kind of get this thing, he calls it getting pregnant, I call it getting the plane off the ground, you got to do the first phase. And that's kind of what I read. And as I looked at what Mr. Rano must have been thinking and the council at that time of drafting that, it says an initial phase of the development. And so that's what we're rolling with right now.
That's what the preliminary thought was prior to this.
Yep.
That's why we had these guys come, because there's a lot of information. Yeah.
Otherwise, it can be a bit confusing if you just read through the MPO with quickly, conceptual.
Because some of it doesn't match with like traditional, I mean, I've read ordinances from so many different cities over the years, and I'm reading this MPDO and I'm going, does he mean that?
But what matches, what makes it fit with traditional and what makes it the subdivision and zoning things, and what makes
A little bit.
makes sense here is that preliminary approval is really the preliminary plat, preliminary site plan approval for the phase, which must be approved in final form at final approval. So that's the lens, I think it should be read through, and not only is it the lens it should be read through, I think that's what the lens requires to be read through. Okay, sorry, I had a lot of attorney speak, hope we didn't make it worse and hopefully.
Hijack, now back to you.
Does any commissioners have any questions for all this? And that's why I was saying if you guys wanted to go down through the list to get everything on there out of the 1015C-9, G through L has already been deferred. I've gone through it. I don't know if everybody else has gone right down through everything. Does anybody have any questions on the preliminary MPDO approval? You explained the process just fine. Okay, this time I'd like to open up the public hearing for the master plan development overlay submitted by Sun River Firelight. If anybody would like to address this, please limit your comments to 3 minutes. State your name and address.
Mark Berkeley, 152 North Road Boulevard. First time I'm hearing the details on Western stuff, I was concerned about a couple problems. One was, it requires that we only have a draft, here we've got a draft. And my concern is that, yes, we have a draft out there, but drafts very quickly become final. And I don't think that the council members ought to, or the commission here ought to be approving something we have today. So having submitted a draft is one thing, having reviewed it, to know that it is, in fact, a draft is something else. So I think those documents need to then work through. Before we say yes, go to the next step. You get a draft in without us really knowing what's in it. That's one item. The other was that any future land that is annexed falls under the same agreement. Now, I didn't hear a limitation on that's already been defined in this current overlay of the zoning change, which means they can come back in later, annex land and say, my company annexed the land, it falls into this, it doesn't matter if it wasn't in the first thing, I just annexed it. Maybe that was just a quick statement of that. Keep up to me, this is like a buy property somewhere else. I don't utilize it. I'm not the agreements. I do appreciate the fact that there's an opportunity for further hearing. I think citizens of Tocqueville care about that and want to know what's going on with this development. And whether it's getting pregnant or taking off or getting off the ground, that's the developers' concern more than it is the city of Tocqueville. We put in our plan that said we're okay with that kind of development. We will allow that in our community. It's good for us, but frankly, I don't care how many they sell. Really don't. Tax base, most of that commercial, the public makes some contribution, but I don't think we ought to have any discussion about how much we could tune something up to make it good for them and good for you and stuff. Okay, they say that, but that shouldn't be something we consider when we community, even in terms of tax base, tax revenue in the future. Just like the previous item, possibly on the children's park, we want businesses to succeed because we put in good ordinances and create a good community and contribute to the community. That's protecting our students.
Thank you. I was just gonna, we could reply after the public comment.
Yeah, let's let all the
Let's do the public
public
hearing first.
Sandy Carruthers, 275 North Central Boulevard. I have a question for Attorney Stone. Two questions. How long have you worked with them?
I have done work for Sun River for approximately 18 years. When I started with the city of Tocqueville, and in the initial agreement and in my proposal for services to the city, I said, I will not represent any party before the city except for three. And at that time, the ownership group of Sun River had no plans whatsoever. I don't even know if half of them knew where Tocqueville was. But I threw it in there because they have been a significant client of mine. Now roll this thing forward 13 and a half years later, and they've gone under contract to buy and develop what I would see as being partially their next Sun River. Fantastic individuals, but that's why I can only say that I am representing the developer, and that's why we have conflict counsel. But the neat thing about all this is that I know the city's ordinances forwards and backwards and what the city's needs and its plans are. And so the idea was that I would draft the agreements, and then we would have conflict counsel look and make sure that the city was protected. And there can be meetings, if they want to have a work meeting with conflict counsel and ask him any hard questions outside of my preference, I would recommend and agree to do that because I want there to be full transparency. I frankly, it would be a tough decision if I had to choose one or the other, because I appreciate the years of working for the city and the years of working for this developer too. So when I saw it coming down the pipe, I'm like, oh my goodness, these two worlds are colliding in that sense. But yes,
How long have you worked with them?
13 and a half years.
So, when you worked with both, okay, this is my next question. When you were communicating, you said we more than the client. So are you Sun River part of the building team, or are you their representative?
No, I'm not their representative. Mr. McCall is the representative.
So you're their legal
I'm
representative?
simply their legal counsel. And so,
You do not make money off of Sun River building?
oh, no. They, like any other client, I bill my time to them hourly, just like I bill my time to
Okay,
the
so
city
the
hourly.
term we kind of made it sound like you're part of the development.
Well, I do know the member, just like I know all the staff of the city on a first name basis. I do know the names of the development team on a first name basis as well.
Any other public comments? Okay, I would look for a motion to close the public hearing.
I make a motion that we close the public hearing on the Firelight, the Firelight MPDO.
Motion look for a second.
Second motion.
A motion and a second, I'll take a vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, I can answer some of the questions if you guys don't want to. You guys want to answer?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So the first question, the big question was that the developer can bring in anything else that they would like. They only have 1,700 acres that they're approved for, and in their MPDO, it defines everything out, and they can't exceed anything outside that area. So that's already been predetermined, and it's still not a public hearing, and we can add comment to that on the other end, but
You
the,
answer my question. When you answer the question is that anything that they annex later.
inside the 1,700 acres.
But that's understanding. We might speak a little casually, but if anything, you have the 1,700 acres is the area to be.
Currently, they have 200 and plus acres, and they're gonna take down 1,700 acres. They can only annex inside of the 1,700 acres and the conceptual MPDO that's been approved. Nothing outside of the conceptual MPDO is allowed. It would be a completely different development.
And even just to detail even more than that, the conceptual plan, the developer has already designated areas within that 700 acres that will be for residential areas along the new bypass road that will have some commercial. It's designated all the open space areas where all the trails and parks will be too. The parks are a little more conceptual, might be moved a little bit here or there, but yeah, so there is, yeah, but it is only limited to that 1,700. It's if they wanted to go and buy another 500 acres, then whole different thing. These approvals.
Start back all over again. And then I'd like to skip to, because it'll tie in a bunch more. So when I hear Attorney Snow say "we," Attorney Snow is representing Firelight, and we have conflict counsel here. So as when he's saying "we," he's saying Firelight is how I interpret it, right?
Yeah.
And that also brings back to the same thing as that there has been multiple meetings with conflict counsel in that aspect, and almost all of them have been on the draft development agreement. And so the draft development agreement is a pretty solid document that I've been involved in quite a bit of, and it has so conflict counsel will finish that draft development agreement to a final agreement. And the one thing that I bring it back to is another point, that the one thing that the planning commission needs to make sure of is that all the approvals that happen tonight and based on the development agreement, we need to make sure that them key points stay in that draft development agreement, because if they go missing, then our recommendation was invalid. Right? Does that answer all the questions? Yeah.
Just to add to that, we've all read that draft agreement as well, so we kind of know what's in it. So it's not like something they're just throwing up here. We have no idea what they're talking about.
All right. Does anybody have any more questions on the process or any concerns on the preliminary MPDO?
So I think the motion, not to steer you, but the motion would be to recommend preliminary approval of the MPDO zoning for the acreage owned by Firelight or the Firelight affiliates. Would that be Bruce?
I would say subject to the further public hearing for recommendation of the development agreement. So
Okay.
they recommend,
Conditioned on ultimate approval of the development agreement.
well, not just what we'll approve, that'll come at the final, but before the final.
Oh, another, okay.
Another public hearing for this body to make a recommendation on that development agreement. So I would add to these statement of the proposed motion would be a motion to approve the preliminary MPDO subject to a further public hearing in which this commission will make some recommendation back to the
So the first one, Keith, just to get everybody back on that, how many? So what is the total? So you just want to make a motion to approve the preliminary MPDO on how many
Yeah,
acres?
174 acres.
173.76 acres in Exhibit A.
Yep.
So 173.76 acres in Exhibit A, and Bruce's recommendation or input would be that we have a second public hearing on the development agreement prior to the final approval. Correct? Correct. So two simple things, but sound complicated. Also, do you think we should include something in that, well, the development agreement will take care of the rest of the NPDO, the preliminary NPDO, correct?
Oh, yeah, but I would also ask that the motion include that those items in 15.9C are deferred.
G through L.
G through L, so they're deferred in your development agreement already, right? So we should defer them here, though.
Yeah.
Okay, as per the development agreement.
Well, you defer them here so that the development agreement is
Because-
okay to include them in, as a deferral in the development agreement.
Okay,
As opposed to defer the development agreement, because we don't have them yet.
we can defer them to final.
Defer them and deal with them in the development agreement in the final approval.
Does anybody have all that information, or does anybody want to recommend it opposite of that?
I would like to recommend that we use what the language was. And we just go with
Yeah,
that,
exactly.
as opposed to me
Just say
trying
so
to
moved.
redo it.
You want, would you like me to restate it the best that I could?
Stated before we do anything.
Well, we need to restate it for
Let's
the,
go ahead. Conflict.
So is it, can we appropriately do it? If he states it, then I
Oh,
can
yeah.
say I approve his statements.
Sean, you can always say so moved.
So, okay, that's what I'm gonna say then. I mean, it makes sense to me, but to put it all together, I don't know.
Right.
So I will make this, motion. When I say this first statement of it, I'm open to comment, you know, so I need to restate it after the comment would be great. But the motion would be to make the preliminary approval of the MPDO, approval of the preliminary plat for phase 1 and 2,
plat's been approved, or recommended.
Plat's already been approved.
Plat's already been recommended for
Yeah, I did
approval.
that recommendation, yeah. So, sorry. So it would be preliminary approval of the Violet NPDO with deferral of the requirements under 1015 C9, 9B2, G through L. And that before making any recommendation of final NPO approval, there will be another public hearing for which this commission will make a recommendation on the draft development.
And the preliminary approval is subject to the 173.76 acres identified in Exhibit A of the development agreement.
That.
Good motion.
So moved.
So seconded?
That was easy. That makes sense.
Okay, we have a motion and a second by Val. We'll take a vote.
Aye.
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 Good. That's a big process. Okay, that'll take us, are you guys staying?
No.
No? Well, I want to tell you guys, thank you very much before you go through leave if you step out, because that was very helpful, and it brought a lot of help.
My only feedback to the planning commission, I have reviewed the proposed changes to the floodplain ordinance, and I think that they're great. I think they're very good. They're fairly similar to most of your municipalities in Washington County, and I think we're definitely headed in the right direction so that we don't have the problem that we had in the past. So we're relying on Afton to keep us in order.
Well, thank you again, I appreciate it. Okay, that'll take us to discussion items. And I don't know if we made any headway on the discussion item, have we, with the resort zone overlay? Okay, I need this guy right here. So the resort zone overlay,
Yeah.
On the table.
I gave it.
Do we need a motion to table a discussion item?
No, you can just move on as the chair.
Okay, well, if there's no other further comments, we will adjourn the meeting at 7:36. I thought that was gonna be the longest meeting.
My wife and kids went camping. I'm like, I'm gonna be here all night.